last week we were having quite the discussion about different wording. And so I just want to finish out with that so we can be done with the rapture discussions. But we were talking about tribulation and wrath. So I went home and I looked up the Greek words for these things. And the Greek word for wrath is orge. And what that basically means is this is God's judicial punishment for sin. That's what wrath means from the Greek word. Whereas the Greek word for tribulation is thymos, and that's more of just great troubling or suffering and that type of thing. So I looked at that and I thought, okay, well, kind of aren't we in tribulation now? Don't we suffer? And it's things like, talks about things like earthquakes and famines and all of that. And in 1 Thessalonians, he talks about all of that as far as the tribulation. So to me, that seems like that's stuff that's going on now, and it's kind of normal because Jesus told us we were going to suffer great trials and tribulations for his sake. So I would think that's what we're seeing now. Is it going to get worse once the Antichrist comes into the scene? Maybe, but they're still considered tribulations. Whereas wrath is the outpouring, the judicial outpouring of punishment on sin. So my thought process when I read that is, okay, well, we've already been forgiven for our sins because of Christ. So we're not really, or we should not really be victim to God's judicial punishment against sin because we're already covered because of the blood of Christ. So does that mean there's a rapture or no? I don't know. What my thinking on it is that somehow, whether God takes us out before all that wrath, before the 7 bowls are poured out and the other, I forget what the other 7 things are, or we're going to be protected. Mm-hmm. Because the price for our sin has already been paid. So we don't need to pay a price again because it's already been done. Gary, you're frowning. What's up?
I don't know, I struggle with that. I understand what you're saying. I hear that often, well, the Bible talks about earthquakes and storms and all kinds of things that go on. Earthquakes in the world has been groaning ever since it was created, we can look at history and see, with Pompeii, I mean, or we can look at history and we can see what the Nazis done in Germany, What if you lived there? Would you think, man, this is the end? You know what I mean? Or whatever. Yeah. There's been things happening all over. But when I hear Mac talk, and he talks about, well, Christ saved us, and he talks about a rapture, that he certainly wouldn't leave us here to struggle with all that. We're his children.
Right.
And in a certain part of Revelation, where all of a sudden, the church is gone. It doesn't talk about the church anymore.
Yeah, starting in chapter 4.
So I believe the tribulation and wrath are more connected than maybe we can think about. We have some tough times, we have some bad, but we have this and that, and certainly some people, it cost their lives are taken because of those type of things.
Yeah, and that goes on today.
But in my mind, I believe when God talked the end times and what it means to have a caught up in the clouds with the Lord and taken away, Christians taken away, tribulation and wrath are going to be what we couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
Not what we're going through today. Yeah. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, the wrath definitely is nothing we could ever imagine when they start pulling out the 7 bowls and the other things. And you're right. Starting in chapter 4 of Revelation, the church is not mentioned again until chapter 22, when everything's at the end. So, it kind of gets you to think, okay, so what happened to them? What happened to the church? is it gone? Or like I said, is it protected? And that's why it's not mentioned.
And again, thinking about, what you initially said, depending if you were, let's say, and I'm gonna use this as just one example, and there's probably a lot of maybe not quite as devastating examples. If you were a Jew back in when the Nazis came in and wanted to annihilate them,
Right.
their world, it would have been so unimaginable
Yeah.
to live, and to have to go through the persecution that they went through.
Yeah.
Would you have thought, this is the wrath,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
the wrath,
Yeah.
it doesn't get any worse than this.
Yeah.
But the rest of the world was kind of going on, it was that, and there's pockets of things that happen throughout, just,
Yeah.
sin is ugly.
Yes.
War, how many wars have we been, how many men
Oh.
have died in war?
Yeah.
It is ugly.
Yeah.
But does it constitute God's wrath? Does it constitute
Yeah.
being in that day of tribulation and wrath? I don't know.
Yeah.
On a world scene.
I get the feeling that when God finally pours out his judicial punishment on sin, it's going to be like nothing we've ever heard of or seen.
Worldwide.
Yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing, if you look at end times theology or whatever you want to call it, countries like the United States, China, all these, they're not mentioned. Not at all. So that leads me to believe that we're going to have nothing to do with it. Because it's all going to be right centered there at Israel. And like I said, when I first did this, if you look at Daniel and you read about his vision and what that angel told him that means, all of that is only concerning Israel. Because Daniel was praying for Israel. So all of this stuff is going to be God's way of getting the Jews to come back to him and come into Christ. And you see part of that in Revelation when it talks about the 144,000. That basically there's going to be 12,000 Jews from each tribe that will come to Christ. And then they will then be the witnesses after Elijah and Moses are gone again. So yeah, most of this is all about the Jewish nation and God bringing his people back to him through Christ, which they haven't accepted.
Yeah, not sure the context on it, but it helps greatly to remember that Daniel is told in the book of Daniel that he has 7 more years to be visited on him and his people.
Right, right.
Which right there establishes the fact that the tribulation, like you were saying,
Yeah.
is for the Jew.
Yeah,
Because as Gary was saying, you don't read anything about the church
no.
in the book. I mean, who does all the evangelism? 144,000 Jews.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, where's the church?
Yeah,
It's out of the way because the church is not destined for wrath.
right, right.
But wrath is destined for Daniel and his people
Right.
because they haven't yet accepted the Messiah.
Right.
So to understand that, it's like the church, Mac would say a hearty amen to that, I'm sure, but the church has never been destined for wrath. It is not destined for wrath. That 7 years isn't even for the world necessarily.
Right,
God uses the world to punish the Jews,
right.
but those 7 years are exclusively for Israel. I mean,
Yeah.
where does Jesus come at the end of those things?
He's coming
Right
to
back
Jerusalem.
to Jerusalem.
Yeah, yeah.
And the rapture, the rapture and Jesus' second coming are definitely seen as 2 events, because in one, we meet him in the air and he never even puts his foot on the ground.
Right.
And at the end of the tribulation, he comes back
Right.
to Israel
In Jerusalem.
in Jerusalem
Right.
with his church
Yeah.
to establish the millennium. But
Yeah.
it's like that's a strong argument when you look at the fact that when you read Revelation, there's no church.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I think of it, but even when John is told, come up here, and I'll show you these things, and a lot of people say, oh, that's John is a foretelling of the rapture. Come up here. Even John is taken out of the wrath.
Yeah.
I get it, maybe so, maybe not,
Yeah.
but you can't really argue with the fact that in Daniel is told absolutely exclusively, you have 7 more missing years yet that are visited on you
Yep.
and your
And your
people,
people,
not
yep.
the church.
Right, right.
It's totally for Israel.
Yeah, and that's why when I started this, I started with Daniel, because people look at that and it's like, well, you can't associate Daniel with the church because it didn't exist.
It didn't exist.
And he was exclusively praying for his people. So that's, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I just am curious to get your feel about God's wrath previous. Has God's wrath, I'm thinking of like the famines and things like that that were definitely a result of God pointing
Right.
disaster, famine, whatever you want to call it, on a particular group of people. But that was focused. Whereas the wrath that we're talking about is more, to me, more comprehensive. And
Yes.
when it uses the term, blood's going to flow as high as a horse's bridle, that's an indicator. I mean, just like the streets are paved with gold, we can't comprehend certain things.
Right.
And to me, when that text is verbalized, that puts it above anything we can really imagine. I mean, I can't imagine how much horror must be injected into a society that the blood would flow as high as a horse's. That's just so beyond my. It's hard to believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, how can that happen?
And what you're talking about, in the Old Testament, God's wrath was kind of localized, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh yeah,
Well, he
that's
got
right.
Lot and his
Yep.
family out, but that was very localized. The wrath was right there.
Mhm.
And same with Noah. It was
Yeah.
all, but when you look at Revelation, this is going to be more worldwide, I believe, because
Yeah.
there's probably still going to be unbelievers, and other countries will still exist, and there's going to be unbelievers and sinful people in those countries. And so, but I think the main focus of that wrath is going to be in Israel and the Middle East.
What, was just, it's fresh in my mind, I just read through these things in Mark yesterday. There's 2 things, you know what Gary's saying. The horse's bridle, that's about 6 feet.
Yeah,
6 feet of blood.
yeah,
That,
Yeah.
and I understand what Gary said. I said too, how can you process that? Jesus says you can't.
you can't.
He has already said in the book of Mark, this will be a time that has never existed and never will exist.
Yeah,
And he also gives an indicator of how bad it is. He says, if those days hadn't been cut short, meaning limited
Right.
to 7 years,
right,
no one would be left alive.
yeah,
No one. And I'm thinking, no one is no one.
yeah,
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying the church is left behind. I don't believe the church is left behind. But if the church is left behind, whatever,
Yeah.
everybody would be dead. We
Yeah.
would figure out how to kill each other or God's wrath. You know, there's 2 things going on in the tribulation. One is we kill each other. The second is God's wrath.
yeah,
But even in that, you know, it talks about hailstones of 100 pounds weight, and people still curse God. It's like,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
what?
yeah,
What? I mean, how can you do that?
yeah,
But the answer to that is Jesus says, because the disciples Jesus saying, look at all these buildings. And he says, not one stone will be left upon another. Disciples come to him and say, when is this going to happen? Well, it happened in part when the Romans got there.
Right,
Because they
destroyed the
totally
temple.
sacked Jerusalem.
Yeah, yeah.
But he's projecting out to the tribulation.
Yeah.
And he even says, let the reader understand. I know, I gotta move this on.
That's
But
good.
that fascinates me. It's
Yeah.
like Jesus telling his disciples, let the reader understand. And Jude and I read through Mark yesterday and saying, couldn't you imagine the disciples looking at each other and saying, let the reader understand.
Yeah.
Is this stuff going to be written down?
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Because he already knows his conversation is going to be written down by somebody. He says,
Yeah.
let the reader understand. But one of the things the reader is supposed to understand, which is us yesterday, is that time, there's never been a time like that time, and never will be.
It never will be, yeah.
And he says, the earthquakes, the famines, and all, he says, don't be misled. They're just they're
Yeah.
labor pains.
Yeah, that's just the beginning, yeah.
Because we've had those things all along.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the communist Chinese, when they came into power, murdered 40 million Chinese.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, anybody in China would have said, that's it, that's the end of the
Yeah,
war.
we're
It's
done.
like-
Yeah.
Yeah. Same,
know-
same with, like Gary was saying, with the Jews in World War II.
And we would say that Stalin made 26 million people disappear when he came into
Yeah,
power.
yeah.
And we would say it's got to be the end of the world. Jesus says, are you kidding?
Yeah,
26 million people, that's nothing.
yeah,
We have 8.5 billion people in the world, and Jesus saying, if I had not intervened in that time, all 8.5 billion people would be dead.
yeah,
That's incredible. That's like Gary says, that's stuff you can't process.
yeah. Well, even Gary said to me yesterday, and I hadn't heard this, that Hawaii got 4 feet of rain
Wow.
from that last storm that went by.
Really?
That typhoon they had.
Yeah, I can't even,
Wow.
I can't even comprehend 4 feet of rain,
Me neither.
let alone 6 feet of blood.
Yeah, and it's localized in the Valley of Megiddo, but
Yeah.
still, it's
Yeah.
like 6 feet of blood.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and if you read that section in Ezekiel that talks about that, it's not only gonna be the blood, but the thousands and tens of thousands of bodies and that are gonna be laying there or the dead, that it says the carrion will come and eat. So,
Ezekiel talks about a battle on the hills around Israel, where he says they will be 7 months burying the dead.
yeah,
That's how many dead
Yeah.
people are
Yeah.
on the hills around Israel. 7 months, they're still going through those bodies, putting them in the graves.
Yeah.
It's like, no,
Yeah.
we haven't, even with all the earthquakes and everything, according to Jesus, we haven't even come close to those
yeah,
days.
no, and that's what I meant about this wrath is gonna be, like you said, it's gonna be something we've never ever heard of before,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
we'll never see again.
It's going to be mind-numbing.
Yeah.
Mind-numbing to me is 100-pound hailstones falling, people
Yeah.
still cursing God. It's
Yeah.
like, are you kidding me?
But this is gonna be God's way of cleansing his creation.
And
Yeah.
calling the Jews
Yeah,
finally back
Back
to
to
him,
him, yeah.
back to their Messiah,
Yeah.
actually, because they killed him the first time.
right. And, when God created the earth, it wasn't meant to be what it is today. It was meant to be he and man in continuous
Yeah.
association with each other, and that got torn apart. So this is the end. This is going to be his way of cleansing all that and putting it back to the way he meant it to be. So, yeah. None of us will probably be alive to see that, but that's okay. We can view it from afar,
Yep.
which is probably better.
And we'll see it during the millennium.
That's right. That's right.
I always wanted to go back to Australia. Maybe I'll get that chance.
So anyway, I mean, those sections of verses in 1 Thessalonians from 4:13 to 5:11, those are the verses that all 3 rapture viewpoints use to defend their positions. And like I said last week, I don't understand how all 3 can use the same verses to defend their positions, because they all have different viewpoints. But anyway, that's where it goes. So then, if we move on in Thessalonians, then Paul kind of switches gears and goes back to telling them about that they should not be living in darkness, so that the day of the Lord should not surprise them. And we're to be self-controlled about ourselves and continue to encourage one another. That's something that he has taught them throughout the whole book, is about encouraging each other. And he does again remind them that God does not appoint us to suffer wrath, but to receive salvation through Christ. So that kind of, again, ties in with the whole thing that was being talked about, okay, so we're not going to suffer the wrath, but when does that start? And like I said last week, I don't know, God knows, and it's going to be in His time. And it's like somebody said to me the other day, we had friends over and we were talking about this, and he said, you do realize that 1,000 years to God is like a day. So, who knows? But God will do it in His time and not before. And that's when everything will take care of. That's when everything will happen. So, so again, like I said, after Paul's discussion with that, and a lot of it is mainly too that he was telling them these things, especially about their dead friends and relatives, to comfort them, to let them know that yes, as they were believers and you are believers, you will be reunited. So you will see your family and friends again when the end comes and everybody's brought back together. So now he goes and talks about from future things to present things. He wanted to refocus them at the task on hand and that they still have work to do. So in other words, he's telling them, I just told you about some future things, but now let's come back to the present. You still have work to do because now you are the ones who are going to be responsible for spreading the word throughout Thessalonica about Christ and your belief in Him and the gospel. And so he wants them to know that, again, like they still have work to do, they have responsibilities. He talks to them about their attitude towards leaders and respect. And sometimes I think that respect in our society today has become almost a forgotten thing. I see disrespect all the time, and you see things on the news, and I've seen it with kids disrespecting their parents and so forth, and then disrespecting leaders like government, church leaders, parents, teachers. At one time I went to school to be a teacher. I would not want to be a teacher today because I don't think they don't get the respect from the kids or the parents. Because the parents will come in and defend the kid even if the kid's wrong. And we saw that when our kids were in school, and that was back in the late 90s, early 2000s that it was going on. So it makes, I see that the world needs to learn about respect again, especially in this country. And do you just give somebody respect automatically, or do they have to earn it? I think people need to earn your respect. That doesn't mean that you mistreat them before that, but I think people do have to earn your respect and not just give it to them. Can that be difficult at times? Maybe. But it's just a matter of watching what a person does to figure out if you should give them your respect. And the same thing with church leaders. And sometimes I think, especially with some things I've seen on television, sometimes I think some church leaders are given respect before they should be, or sometimes too much. How do I want to phrase this? If we hold a church leader in too high a regard, are we possibly putting them on a pedestal and maybe setting them up for a fall? Well, Gary, you talked about it too, about guys on television that come on and ask for money and so forth, and then say all this stuff about, you know, God's going to kill me if you don't give me the money and so forth. And then what happens? Next thing you know, they've fallen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or the guy Pastor Kirk talked about in California that said he was a healer or something. I forget. Yeah.
He knew things about people.
Well, Benny Hinn was another one. Yeah. Yeah. That he thought he was a healer, but the guy Pastor Kirk talked about, they ended up finding out that he went on the internet and did research about people. And then he'd stand up there and tell them that he was a prophet and he could tell them what was going on. And, you know, again, that's where the respect comes in. You know, he was probably given a lot of respect in that church. But next thing you know, go ahead, Gary.
When you talk about respect and what have you in the world we live in today, you're absolutely right. Respect has so much value if you have a culture that has the children have been brought up to understand what respect is or whatever.
Right.
But when and let me just use this as a
Sure.
framework. If you go back to Mayberry, there was a society that respect was just something that was almost a given because everybody from a young age is taught how important respect is.
Right.
And they grew up doing that. But as the culture changed, you think of the world we live in today. If a policeman can do the right thing, 10 times, but then really sticks it to you the next time, you start to lose respect, not for just that guy, but you start to lose respect for the law enforcement itself.
Right.
When teachers do the wrong thing in school,
Right.
tell me how many times they did the right thing, all the kids start remembering, that guy's no good. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden there's an umbrella that there start to be disrespect to all the teachers. That can grow, it can be like a cancer within those people.
Yeah.
And that can just be built and built and built. And then you get a society where disrespect is commonplace.
Yeah.
And that's where we are today. And that wasn't because our kids, how many parents abuse their children today?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And when they share what they're doing with the other kids are growing up wanting their freedom and their revolt against, mom and dad or whatever, because it's just part of growing up. You want to step out on your own and mom and dad all of a sudden don't know anything. You've heard the phrase, why don't we let all the kids leave when they're 15, when they know everything? But we all know that just,
Right, right.
So all I'm saying is disrespect doesn't just accidentally happen.
Right.
We live in a culture that maybe America really had a lid on it at one time, and you can go back and see where it was different.
Yeah.
Today, it's not the same world anymore
Yeah.
in our culture.
Nope.
And it was a culture change that led us to where we're at.
Yeah.
And how do you get back? I don't know. That could
Yeah.
be a tough path.
And it didn't change overnight.
That's right.
If you go back and you look at how things were in the 50s, and then the 60s, and then the 70s, and you started to see the gradual change. All of a sudden, we take prayer out of school, and then we take this, and then we decided it's okay to do this, and then things just keep progressing in the wrong direction. And it's been going like that since probably the late 60s and early 70s. It's been just going, as things move along, this thing becomes more acceptable, and then this thing becomes more acceptable, and then this becomes more acceptable. And
I can't imagine the lyrics that a lot of young people are listening to with those, the voices that are coming out with music that I don't listen to.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I'll get an earshot of something. You're listening to that.
yeah,
Our parents said the same thing about our music.
oh yeah,
Yeah, and where are we at today?
Yeah.
The music today is a whole lot worse than what our parents were hearing.
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, my parents thought my music was loud, which it was, because I was a heavy metal guy, you know, let me crank up the Led Zeppelin or the, you know, whatever else it might have been. Yeah.
Yeah, none of us are innocent in all
Oh,
this.
no.
You know, and I get that.
Yeah.
Our culture isn't any just one of us. It's all of us gradually moving this way or that, and where we have evolved to.
And when it got to the point where both parents had to work, and sometimes one of them had to work 2 jobs,
Yeah.
now the child care becomes less of a focus as much as earning the money. And then the money becomes more important than anything else. And that has led to some of this. So I remember when our kids were little, I had to straighten my son out one day. He was mouthing off to Connie. And I pulled him aside and I grabbed him by the collar and I said, listen, you may talk to your mother like that, but you will not talk to my wife like that. And that was the end of that. But I fear things like that don't happen as often today as they should.
Mhm.
And then the kids grow up with that, and then they carry that with them through their life.
Is this a rabbit trail?
Not really.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I'm chewing over this respect and love conflict in my head, and there's an accountability factor that seems to jack the lack of respect. You know, when there's no accountability for anything, then the need for respect for things goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, from the 50s, 60s, you know, especially between 50 and 70, if as a young person, if I did a certain thing, I knew it was wrong, and I knew there were consequences, whether, you know, my neighbor coming out of his house and wanting to grab me by the neck or whatever it was. I knew there were consequences. But now it seems like anybody that does anything against the norm, which is questionable, there's no consequences. So when there's no consequences, the respect just goes. Now, as Christians, and this is, to me, this is the conflict. How do you inject love into a society that has no respect for just about anything? And that's a tough one.
It's tough, but God tells us we're supposed to love
Yeah, I know.
our neighbors. And even in, and this is, Connie asked about a rabbit trail, even in here, in these verses, last few verses of chapter 5, and even going into 2 Thessalonians 2, Paul is telling them, you not only have to respect them, but also you're responsible for watching over them, encourage them, help the weak, have patience. So he's telling them, you know, yes, respect, but when they do things that are wrong, you are responsible for the ones to either call them out on it or help them through it, encourage them, have patience with it, whatever it might be. And that's kind of where he was going with all of this. And the other one he talked about, and this is, I wrote this down last night, and I just want to see what somebody has to say. If someone were to come to you and tell you that they decided they're going to quit working, now I'm not talking about being retired, they're going to quit working and said, I don't need to work, God will provide. What would you say to him?
Man doesn't work,
What'd
he
you
doesn't
say,
eat.
Nancy? You're nuts.
Isn't there a verse, man who doesn't work, he doesn't eat, or is that?
That's in 2 Thessalonians, and that's why I brought
Yeah.
it up, because he's warning them not to be idle and that they need to work to
Yeah.
eat. And go ahead, Jeff.
I would say too, what Gary said, there is a verse that tells us if you don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah.
And also, one of the big, I had taught in here earlier about it. One of the big temptations of Satan is to get us to put God to a foolish test.
Yeah.
And Ken, Jude and I were just talking about what that means yesterday. It doesn't mean that talking about that in reference to guardian angels. Doesn't mean I can stand out on 283 and not get hit.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I can do something stupid and not get hurt.
Right.
Because all those things, yeah, God will take care of me. Yeah, I believe, subject to scripture, that angels look out for me.
Right.
They did Jesus, but even Jesus says, yeah, but you never put God to a foolish test.
Right.
And in light of what he already said about working, it would be really a dumb thing to sit there and say, God will take care of me, when he already says, yeah, I will. Get a job.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, you know, and even Paul talks about it in here. Jesus says we are supposed to take care of the poor, the widows, so forth and so on. But that in this situation that Paul is working with here in the Thessalonians, they're not widows or not able to work. They just have decided they're not going to work, and they're going to live off other people.
I think it's called a socialist, right?
What's that? What'd you say?
I think that's called a socialist, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a way.
Don't let everybody else work and take care of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And I think I'd mentioned it earlier, Thessalonica is Greek, and the Greeks had a real aversion to working, which is why they had slaves, or whatever you want to call them at that point. And that caused them to have all this idle time to be gossipers and to get involved in some of the pagan worship things that were going on. So in doing this, not only is Paul telling them, you know, use, and he says it in 2 Thessalonians 2, before the if you don't work, you don't eat, use me, and I forget who was with him, I think Titus, as an example. We came here, we did not come here and feed off of you. We worked, and we made our own living. We were able to feed ourselves without relying on you. So that's what he's telling them now. You know, you can't just sit and be idle and expect other people to support you. And in the meantime, now you're opening yourselves up to false teaching. You're opening yourselves up to the pagan worships that go on in Thessalonica because it's Greek, instead of staying busy and doing what you're supposed to do and being representatives of Christ. So as a representative of Christ, even we are told not to be lazy. You know, when Christ was on the earth, he and his apostles did something to earn money because they were basically took care of themselves. Now, did other people feed them? Yeah, Mary and Martha did, and then when he went to Nicodemus's house and different places where they would go, but that wasn't their main focus of being able to live. So that's what Paul is encouraging them here to do that. And he talks about encouraging the people, the timid, because they may have gone out and tried to work, but it was unsuccessful. So now they're discouraged. Well, he's telling the believers, you need to go to them, encourage them, help them move forward, and not just sit where they are and be idle and expect everybody else to take care of them. So, yeah, I asked that because years ago, I actually knew somebody that said that to me. And I just kind of looked at him and I said, I'm not sure how that's going to work out for you. I didn't know what else to say. It's like, why would you even think that? I didn't get it, but I don't know whatever happened with them. after that, I kind of lost contact, but I was so stunned that he said that, I just really didn't know what to say. 'Cause it was not anything I expected from a believer to tell me that.
Well, maybe it's just, well, God bless you, let's see how that works out for
Well,
you.
I kind of did say, well, we'll see how that works out for you, but
I'm thinking, did he need to go on a diet or something? He
I,
would have been losing weight.
yeah, I don't know, but it was kind of interesting. So, yeah. So that was, where Paul was going with all this, and just these last verses and into chapter 2, or book 2, he's telling them, be joyful, be thankful. That's one of the things that we talked about in the respectable sins class, that one of the respectable sins that he brought out was unthankfulness. And I started reading it, and it's like, okay, well, how often do I actually thank God for what I have or what he's doing, or just that I was able to wake up today, and things like that. And that's what he's talking about them here is, to be thankful in there, no matter what the circumstance is. And like I said earlier, Jesus said, we're going to have trials and tribulations. And, yeah, they're going to be tough. Is it going to be tough to be thankful for it? Maybe. But there's usually a reason. And at the end, we can figure it out. But so, he's telling them this stuff, and, and to keep away from evil, that was the biggest thing. And that ties back into him telling them, you need not to be idle. Because once you start to be idle, now you have the opportunity for sin to set in and evil to set in, and the opportunity to go back to your pagan worships because you're idle. So that kind of wrapped up 1 Thessalonians, and it goes right into 2, because again, he just comes back in and starts praising them and talking to them about their faith and how they need to continue in what they're doing, exercise their faith, and not to do what the Greeks do again by not working and just lazing around. And that sometimes, if they have an easy life, it can lead to shallow faith. And I thought about that. Would that be appropriate? That if our life's too easy, our faith is a little shallow?
I would agree with that. If we don't have trials or tribulations in our life or challenges,
Yeah.
that's when we grow the most in our faith, I believe.
Yeah. Yep. And that's kind of, Paul had said that too, but I've also read that in other things, that it's the trials in life that strengthen our faith, not the easy stuff. Because the easy stuff, then you're now the temptation can be, oh well, I got it made now, I'm good. I don't need to worry about any of this other stuff. But it's the trials that bring you back, and you realize that, I can't do this on my own. Without the Spirit, without God, I can't do this.
I think when you're idle, there's more of an opening for idols to take residence in your heart. You're sitting back, I have plenty of time to watch TV, and then you get hooked or addicted to that, or to reading a book, but not the Bible. That's just 2 examples.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things in this world today that can take our focus off Christ, that make life easy. And it would be real easy to just follow in that path or that trail or whatever it might be. But usually God would then, I think, throw something in our path that is like, oh, wait a minute, I wasn't expecting that. And so now what do you do? You know, and Paul even talks about that God can strengthen us through trials. And he talks about rest, and I was wondering, how in the world does God give us rest in the midst of a trial or a tribulation? I was trying to think of something in my life that I would think, where did I get rest in that? It was hard to come up with something. Go ahead, Gary.
Some of it is just that peace that passes understanding. The
Okay.
scripture promises that, which and I have found that in the midst of trials, even, you know, going back to cancer.
Mhm.
You know, there was a time when my oncologist said, it's too big to operate, it's too big to radiate, and it's spreading more. And I'm thinking, that's it.
Yeah.
And Jude was with me. We sat there and cried, but it's like, we went home and said, okay, if that's what God wants, that's what God wants.
Right.
If he wants me to live, I'll live. If he wants me, you know, every day I have one out of one chance of living or dying.
Right. Yeah.
But we didn't despair of that. And I look back on that thing, I never want to go through that again.
Yeah.
That was on a gray February day, and it was hard.
I'm sure.
But even, you know, I'm thinking, how do I even tell the kids this?
Yeah.
And that was after 3 years of cancer treatments.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking, how do I tell the kids this? But in the midst of that, there was. I mean, I would tell anybody in this class, my kids, anything. If you follow God, he never lets you down.
Yeah.
He just doesn't. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't,
Yeah.
you know, the rest I think is just, I slept every night through that. Never stayed up despairing of anything. And I'm thinking just those little things. I didn't have any trouble with a meal.
Mhm.
It's just, you know, every day I thought, okay, I have 2 things to do today. Do everything my oncologist is saying and just rely on God.
Yeah.
And it's, I never feared that process, and it's not me. That was not me.
Yeah.
That was, it's like James says, count it all joy, my brethren, when you fall into various kinds of trials.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you know that that those trials will produce endurance
Yeah.
and then perseverance, that the man of God may be whole, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. It's like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, looking back on those days now, I'm thinking, I'm not even close to being the guy I was back then.
Yeah.
How did I get there? Because of those trials.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't unravel, didn't fight depression, anything. Didn't unravel, and I look back and think, like you, how did I find rest in
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
It was, it just was.
Yeah.
It was peace that I couldn't understand.
Yeah.
It just was. It's from God. That's all you can say about it.
Yeah, and I went through that when Connie and I were separated, and at one point, God just kind of said to me, let it go. And as soon as he said that, I was like, okay, now I'm at peace.
Yeah. It's just a peace or something. You can't explain it. But you can explain it because Scripture already says
Yeah.
it's peace that is beyond
Yeah,
understanding.
beyond understanding.
Somebody says, where do you get your peace? It's like the legitimate biblical answer is,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's peace that I don't understand.
Yeah. It's the same thing with grace. Where do you get the grace? Well, I don't know.
Yeah. It's,
I just do.
yeah, you just do. It's
Yeah.
from God.
Yeah.
That was awesome, Jim. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I also think God provides moments of rest and peace during your trials. With Mom's journey lasting almost 10 months, my trust, the Bible words I was reading was trust. And that trust grew and grew and grew and grew like I've never had before with God. And that produced the peace that you were talking about. And then there would be 2 days where there was nothing to be concerned about with that, with the situation. And that was my rest. And it happened over and over and over. And then there we go back to the, okay, I gotta deal with this, gotta deal with this, gotta deal with this. And then I get half a day to just sit and thank him and trust. So God provides in the middle of a storm.
Yeah. Yep. And like Jeff said, it's not something you can understand or really explain to other people if they don't, if they're not believers and they don't understand, there's no way you can explain it to them.
I would even say you don't really understand it at the time.
Right. Right.
But I had to turn it off. That was actually for me. But anyway, you don't understand it at the time. You
Yeah.
just look back on 2 or 3 days and you think, these have been pretty good days.
Yeah.
You don't, it's not like you sit down there and say, I really got the peace that passes understanding. You just do. You
just
live.
do, yeah.
You live in that atmosphere of it.
Yep.
And then you look back on those days and you and your wife are saying, how we ever get through that? You say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But we did.
Yeah.
We didn't fall apart. We didn't collapse. We didn't do anything stupid. We just got through them.
Yeah. Yep. And that's all God. I mean,
It is all God.
it was the same with me, because after he told me to let it go, everything changed. It was like, oh, okay, this is kind of good now.
Yeah.
You know, let it go. So, all right. Well, he finishes out. Most of 2 Thessalonians is a repeat of 1 Thessalonians, which is kind of interesting because he wrote 2 Thessalonians about 6 or 7 months after he wrote the first one, and he sent it with Timothy. So he's kind of just reiterating to them again things that he told them in the first book. I don't know if he felt they needed a reminder so quickly or what it was, but it's all kind of the same stuff. But when he does talk to them about promises, reward, and punishment in this book towards the end. And promises, he tells them they'll be worthy of the kingdom, but they are now suffering for the kingdom, which is true. They will have rest in the present from persecution when Jesus comes. They will be among those praising Jesus, for they believed. So, and that basically he's telling them that, their lives are now for eternity. But here on earth, there's going to be some issues that you're going to have to deal with, but the kingdom is still your reward. And then he goes into punishments, and one of the things he does is kind of, at least I took it this way, so I looked it up, that God must judge sin and condemn sinners, unbelievers, because his holiness allows no other course of action. A holy God cannot have sinfulness in his presence. He cannot lose righteousness without hating sin. And then Paul kind of goes into this whole thing about vengeance and revenge. So, because I think the Thessalonians were having some issues with, people who weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So he goes into this whole thing, and he says that vengeance is to satisfy God's holy law. It is based on his holiness and righteousness. Whereas revenge is to pacify a personal grudge. So when God judges the world with vengeance, it's because it's based on his holiness and righteousness. And what Paul was telling them, that God is holy and cannot have sin in his presence. So at the end, his vengeance is going to be based on his holiness and righteousness and condemning sin. So I think in that, I guess he was kind of, again, trying to express to them that, and it comes up in that chapter, the same thing, that you are not meant for wrath because you are believers. Your sin has already been paid for. You don't have to pay again. And so that's kind of where he ends the book, except he at the very end, he goes into the if you don't work, you don't eat, which we had talked about earlier, because he talks about that in the first book. So like I said, a lot of the second book is pretty much some of the same stuff from the first, just as reminders for the Thessalonians. So that's pretty much it for First and Second Thessalonians. You're probably all just as confused about pre, mid, and trib as I am, even though we talked about it. So we'll just wait and see what God does, because He'll do it when He's ready.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you for allowing me the time.